what can you say about someone who needs no introduction, who has been a part of Apple history for so long, has done so much for the Mac community? You were one of those rare gems that even when you were at Apple, officially full-time, you were able to kind of get out and sneak out and talk to people and get people some information, and you ran your Mac Automator site. So we really appreciate all the information you've been able to share over the years. And now you have this new story to share, and I think we all can't wait to hear it. So please, big round of applause for Sal Soghoian.
Where somebody compliments you so much it's hard to do anything afterwards. But I'd like to turn that around and first of all say thank you to Ed and Neil for their integrity, their tenacity, and their inspiration in putting on this event and keeping community at the forefront of the Apple platform. I really thank them, and I also thank you for letting me be part of this family and welcoming me into this group. I really thank you for letting me be here today. So, thanks. So, this is Automation Magic for macOS and iOS, and I'm Sal Soghoian. And last year at this time, I was registered as mystery speaker. And it was quite an interesting time for me. I had been swimming with the whale for about 20 years. And swimming with the whale is a really interesting and challenging thing to do. The whale has to believe that what you have to offer will help the whale get to where it wants to go. And you have to swim close enough to the whale that you get carried along and you get the propulsion that you need. But at the same time, you have to maintain the integrity of what it is you're working on and trying to accomplish. And for many years, I swam with the whale, and everything kept going forward and kept advancing. And then one day, probably by accident, I got hit by a fin or the tail, and I found myself on the shore. And that's okay, because my feet are in the ocean. I'm still part of the ocean. And what I've learned over years and years and decades of life in both inside and outside the company is that what you do when you find yourself on the shore is you get your board and you look out on the ocean for where the wave is going to be. Not where the wave has been or is, but where the wave is going to be. And then you paddle out to that place and you ride the wave that comes. And so while I was paddling the wave, it made me start thinking about the current state of the Apple platform and examining that and trying to sense where the next wave was going to be. And so I was looking at, the different things about iOS and macOS, and I noticed that Apple had, over the years, had been putting a lot of attention into trying to get some kind of parity with features in the two OSs. And they even made it so that it was easier to transfer data between the platforms, and that some of the special features like Touch ID were common to both platforms. And when it came to automation, they had this thing called extensions, which is a kind of automation, and they had that on both platforms. And recently they acquired Workflow, which in many ways and respects is similar to what Automator does on the Mac. So I was sensing that there's this kind of parity going on in their direction that they're heading with the platforms. But when it came down to something that I really knew intimately and that I knew customers used a lot, like scripting with JavaScript and with AppleScript, there really isn't anything like that on iOS. And so that got me thinking that, well, that means that the people that are on iOS can enjoy the benefits of automation, while the people that are on iOS have to deal with their hands trying to duplicate the kind of functionality that you can automate on iOS. And there has to be a commonality there. We really need some kind of an approach where you have the ability to do this level of intricate automation on both platforms. And that's what I started seeing the potential of a wave happening. And I kept swimming out toward that. And I got out to a part in the ocean, and I found out that I had friends out there. And that's where I met the guys from the Omni Group, and they were working on something that's called Omni Automation, which is a dual platform scripting architecture for their applications, so that you could write a script on iOS that works exactly the same way on macOS. And not only that, they were working on an idea for being able to transmit data and to control things between applications. And I looked at that and I said, this is kind of interesting. It's similar to the vision that I'm having for the platforms. So let me just show you something, and then I'll talk more about that. So I'm going to open up Omni Outliner on my iPad. Can everybody see this? And so there's a blank Omni Outliner document, and then I'm going to drag out a Safari window, and I'll resize it so that it's split screen. And this is a copy of a web page from grocerylist.org, and it's just lists of different categories of grocery items. But you can click it or tap it, and it will cause an action to happen. So it says, you want to open this in Omni Outliner, and then it's going to show me a script written in JavaScript that has all the data from that category. And if I choose to run this script by tapping the Run Script button at the bottom, that category gets transferred to my document. So I can repeat this process with each one of the categories that I'm interested in and transfer that category over to my Omni Outliner document. It's just a matter of touching and approving. And then once it's in there, then I can do what Omni Outliner does really well, and I can select different things like the different vegetables that I want, squash, and then I can go and look at fruits, and I can pick apples and bananas and maybe kiwis, and then I could go to seafood and pick naturally salmon and tilapia. That's really good. And then I can get rid of the unused ones by running a script within Omni Outliner itself that's part of a plugin. So I can say remove unchecked items. So I'm going to tap that script, and it does what I want. Then I can go back and say, okay, uncheck everything that's currently checked and run another script. And because I use Omni's free syncing service called Omnipresence or iCloud, all of this automatically gets transferred to my phone. So I just went from a web page to a shopping list on my phone by just tapping. Now, there's a lot going on there. Something made the web page talk to Omni Outliner, and then something let me control Omni Outliner to do what I want with that application. Now, why is this important? Well, so I'm on my board, my feet are in the water, and I can sense that the water's swelling here, that something's happening, that there's going to be motion. And I'm looking at this architecture, and I said, man, this would sure be nice if this was throughout the whole thing, right? Well, maybe it'll start with Omni, and then we could bring in other developers, and the next thing you know, Apple will pick up on this. and I'm seeing the potential here of being the solution that I'm looking for. And I wanted to share that with you today. So I'm going to show different examples. I'm going to explain this in simple detail with simple examples because I believe simple examples get the point across and show the basic principle. Is that okay with you? All right, great. So let's take a look at what is Omni Automation. Well, we're all familiar with JavaScript, right? Everybody knows it. You might hate it, you might write it, some use it, some don't. But we're all familiar with it because we're used to it being set up with CSS and HTML5 and wrapped in a web page to expose the document object model. This is part of WebKit. It's a central part of WebKit on both macOS and iOS. WebKit has this architecture. They have core JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. It's all built in. And WebKit ships on every Apple device. So what Omni has done is they've taken their apps and they've exposed their apps to core JavaScript that's part of WebKit so that you can use JavaScript to control the actions of the applications and manipulate the objects in their documents on both macOS and iOS. So let's take a look. I'm going to show you an example of what Omni Automation or JavaScript looks like when it's run within an Omni application on iOS. How many of you here use OmniGraffle? It's like the Swiss Army knife of programs. It does everything. The more I work with it, the more I'm amazed by it. If you don't have it, do yourself a favor and get it. But let's watch this in action. So I'm going to launch OmniGraffle here. And I'll just create a new document locally on my iPad. And I'll choose New Document from the plus sign. And then as a template, I'll use just a blank page. So I'll tap the blank one there and let that load. Voila, and now we have a blank page. So on the toolbar, I'll select the Shape tool, and then I'll draw out a square on the page with my finger. Can everybody see that? Is that a good size? Okay, great. And then I'm going to tap this, bring up the options bar with cut, copy, select, all that, and more options. I'll tap the more options, and the last one is copy as JavaScript. I'll choose copy as JavaScript, tap it again to bring up the options bar, and delete it. So I'm going to go up to the automation menu, which is that menu on the top there, and the first item in the automation menu is an automation console. This is a console, like in the terminal. You can control the way it looks, whether it's dark, light, whether the font size, you can clear it. And it has a prompt at the bottom left. And if I tap into that with my finger, I'm going to click the Paste Clipboard. I'm going to tap Paste. And that script is the JavaScript necessary to recreate the object I deleted. And you'll notice that it's just like standard JavaScript, and I'm going to tap the Run on my keyboard, and that will execute that. Let me close the console, and there's my shape. So I just showed that as far as the Omni applications are concerned, they look at this object and they say, oh, this is just an object. I can recreate this object using this JavaScript. So you have the ability to relate an object to a script. That's really important. Now let's take a look at objects. When you have an object in a document, one of the things about objects that we all know is that they have properties. Like a property might be its shape, it might be the stroke thickness, it might be the fill color, it might be the stroke color. And the first thing that you always do when you're exploring a new scripting environment is start changing the properties of objects. So let's see if we can talk to that object on the page using the console. So I'm going to go back here, and let's launch the console. Now the console is an active session talking to that document. So you'll notice that that script had a variable called G1 that represented the shape. I'm going to type G1 dot and then the property, shape equals, then within quote marks, the word circle, which is text. I'm going to tap run and then close it, and you can see I changed the shape through the script. I set the value of the shape property to the word circle. Now let's change some more. I'll go back and I'll say, give me the stroke thickness, and let's set that to something like 12 points. All measurements in a layout program are usually done in points. And then let's start manipulating some color. So I'll say, I'm going to change the stroke color. So stroke color equals color class, period, and then the lowercase word for the color, which in this case is blue. Now I'm going to do a fill color, and instead of using a term like blue or red, I'm going to indicate the color in red, green, blue, or RGB values with 0 to 1, with 1 being 100%. So that's 100% red, and the last one is the alpha, 100% alpha. So now, when I close that, you can see I manipulated the object. So we have a communication architecture built into the Omni applications. And I can even go in and start manipulating text as well. So I'm going to set the text of that object by going g1.text is equal to, hey, let's get the value of the shape property, and we'll use that as my text. Then I'm going to set the font name, which is the name of the font family, like in this case, Helvetica. And then once I've set that, I can set the font size or the text size. So I'll go g1.property text size equals, new value is going to be a number in points, and then g1.text color will be a color value, so I'll have color dot white. So now I've set a bunch of properties of this, and I've closed the console. So what this shows is that you have the ability to manipulate all aspects of the objects in the Omni application. It responds to it. And what's driving that is core JavaScript that's in WebKit on that iPad. Core JavaScript is being used as the manipulation language, and Omni has written their apps to respond to its commands. Now, just to show you that this is indeed dual platform, I'm going to do the same exact thing on a Mac, but a little bit quicker because I don't have to type with my finger, and I can actually watch both at the same time. So I'm going to draw out a square. I'm going to go to the Edit menu, and then choose Copy As JavaScript, and that will generate the script for that object and put it on the clipboard. Then I'm going to open up the console window on the Mac, and there's the console window. I'll paste that same script in. Notice it looks almost identical except for the positions of where the object is. And then when I run it by typing the return key, it creates the shape. It also creates a variable that holds the reference to that shape I just created, G1. And then I can go back and say G1, shape equals, quote, circle, end quote, which is a string, and you can see it changes. One of the advantages, of course, of working on the Mac is you can have these multiple window overlays, which we enjoy while we're working. So I'm talking to the app directly through a console architecture, and it's responding to me. It's a simple example, but it's proving that the architecture that we're looking for manipulation and control of applications is built in, and they're taking advantage of it. And this is being driven not by Apple events, but by core JavaScript that's in WebKit on the Mac. Same architecture, same type of script, and we can even manipulate the text as well. And I think when I looked at this, I said, wow, this is an interesting approach to deliver dual functionality across both platforms. If I can indeed write a single script that will work the same on both, that's really incredible. People have been trying to do that forever. And the good thing about JavaScript and WebKit is so optimized, it's so fast, and it has a really robust library of methods and controls that you can use with it to get done what you need. You have all the standard things about for each, mapping, all the different text manipulations, numeric things are all built in. So now I'm going to change the value of the text color property of that shape and set it for color.white, and voila. So we have the same type of experience that we had on the iPad, we have on the Mac. Indeed, they're just nearly identical. And I saw this and I said, this is important. And the lesson here is that core JavaScript and WebKit can be used to control applications, Apple applications, regardless of platform. And this is the first requirement of that meeting of the points between the two platforms. And I said, wow, now this really has potential. So let's look at how you take this scripting architecture and actually apply it within an application. Any questions about that so far? It's kind of semi-interesting? All right, good. So actions, libraries, and plugins. So how do you deliver this functionality within an Omni application? Well, here's our little script for creating a colored circle, right? First line, I'm going to get the current canvas, because OmniGraph is going to have multiple canvases. Then I'm going to define a space called a rect, that's just a space on the canvas. Then I'm going to define a fill color value, a stroke color value. I'm going to create a shape using the add shape method, pass in the type of shape I want, circle, and the boundaries. Then I'm going to set the stroke thickness, fill color, and stroke color. So we're going to use this script a little bit during this whole demonstration. So to deliver that within the application, you create something called an action. And an action is essentially just a script that's in a certain context. And this is what the action looks like in JavaScript. It's a function that contains a declaration of an action. This is where you put in the code that does stuff. And then a validation routine. So you might want this action only available when somebody has something selected, or when they have 3 things selected, not 2, 3. So this is the validation routines where you put in your code for determining whether it's going to actually appear in the menu or not. And then you return that to the application so it can build all of this in memory. So for example, if I want to write an action that changes the color of every selected graphic to red, then the first thing I have to do is say, is more than one graphic selected, or is at least one graphic selected? So selection, which is whatever selected, graphics, length. If it's greater than 0, return true, otherwise return false, and that determines whether the action shows up in the menu or not. And then to do the function, I'll just say, give me all the selected graphics, and then I'll do for each on each one of them, and I'll set each one of them's fill color to the color red. And that's all that my action requires. That's basically it. Now, when you have actions, you'll often write a lot of code that you might use in every action. So this is where libraries come in. Now, I might have an action or 3 actions that all use the same bit of code for turning objects red. And I could put that code into a single file. And matter of fact, I can put a bunch of different little things into that file and then have all the actions point to that code instead of including that in each action. So I don't have to add code into each one of these action files. I can just create a library and call that library from within the action. And this is what a library looks like. It's a JavaScript script that has a single function. You declare it being a library, and then you list your functions that you want to do. And in this case, one of those would be turn those things red, right? And then you return that back to the application. And then I can call that library from within my action like this by identifying the library. I have one here called stencil library and one called shape library. And then call the functions within those libraries. And then my action doesn't have to have a lot of code in it because I just rely on the libraries. Now, actions and libraries in Omni world live within plugins. And these plugins are really just a folder that contains the actions and the libraries. It contains string files that are localized. And it contains icons so you can put your action in a menu bar or on the touch bar on your Mac, and any other kind of resource files that you use in your plugin. So you might have special maps or something in there, or links, or whatever else you want. And to install these, you just click it on the Mac, and it will ask you, do you want me to install this for you? Or on iOS, you can use Omnipresence. So with Omnipresence, if you install a plugin on any of in any of your Apple devices, it's installed on all of them. So that you just take the plugin, drop it into OmniGraffle on your Mac, and it shows up on OmniGraffle on iOS. It's really convenient. But if you need to, you can install them through web links. So here, I have a link in a web page. I'm going to tap it, and then you'll see something like this, where it'll list it as a zip file. Choose More, and then Import with OmniGraffle. And then once I tap that, it'll say, hey, I'm installing a plugin. Make sure that you know who you got this plugin from, because you're installing code that will run within OmniGraffle, right? And it's fine. It tells you what the plugin does. I know who it comes from. And then once I approve it, it shows up. So this installed the plugin for dealing with org charts. I want a circular org chart that does 7 of those in a circle. So I'm going to go to my plugin, and from the plugin, I'll choose an action to do 7 circular things. And it figures out the calculation for laying that out. So that's how you install a plugin on iOS. Now, sometimes you might just want to make it simple and just write a script, or what it's called a solitary action. I don't want to create a whole plugin. I just want to have a certain script that I can use on all my Omni device, all my Apple devices with my Omni software. And to create a solitary action, it's just a single text file. It's a JavaScript script, just like the other action, except you put some metadata in at the top that you say what applications it's targeting, who you are, what it does, and what you want to appear as the menu or as a button. And that's all you do. Otherwise, the action code's just like the other one with your function code and your validation code right there, and then return it. So here's an example of me installing a solitary plugin or a single action. I open up the plugins folder on my Mac like this. I'm going to switch to BBEdit, which I use to write my actions in. And here's my action. Then I'm going to grab the proxy icon for that. I'm going to drag it over into my folder. And now it's installed in OmniGraffle. So let's go back to OmniGraffle. And then I'm going to go to the automation menu. And you can see there it is, but it's not highlighted because they weren't selected. So I'll select them. Now I can run it. So it did the validation and then turned some red. So there's a quick overview of how you actually use this automation within the app as a plugin, right? So you can write these scripts and you can use them in the apps and you can share them between apps and you can hand them to other people. They can download them, they can install them. It's a wonderful world for automating Omni stuff. But if that's all this was, then that's not that exciting. It's cool, but it's not that exciting. There's more to this story. So that's a solitary action, and they're part of plugins. But where it starts getting interesting is in what Omni has done next to make these portable, to make these integratable with other objects and other applications and other platforms. Have you ever been in an application like a browser and you click it? You like that? And you click it and it opens up another app. So I tap a map in a browser window and the Maps application opens. Or I'm on a web page that has this great, incredible musician who plays stuff, right? And I tap his link and it opens up iTunes. And it shows you information about the album right there that you can go listen to that's so incredible. There's something going on. What is that thing that's happening when I touch one app but another app does something? And did you know that some apps like Photos have special links that you can write or use as other developers? For example, this is the link for if you want Photos to show the last import. You put this link into your application or your web page, and it will cause Photos to change to the last import album. So these are using URLs, which means Universal Resource Locator. And we've all seen this, and we know what they are. For example, here's a URL for showing a map, right? And you can see they're kind of long. It's got a question mark and a bunch of stuff and a bunch of stuff. Sometimes they're shorter, like this one for iTunes. Sometimes they're particular, like this one for Photos. And sometimes they can just be really short, like this one for the dictionary app. Did you know if you type DICT:/ and a word, it will open up the dictionary to that word? Yes. So there's all kinds of URLs. And this is interesting because on iOS and macOS, URLs are used by applications as a way of sending messages to each other. Well, this is important. With a standard kind of messaging URL, you'll see it begin with some kind of domain, like the application or the company or something. And then there'll be a question mark, and then there's like parameter equals value, and then an ampersand, and then another parameter equals value. This is pretty standard approach when applications send URLs to each other. But an Omni Automation URL is a little bit different. It looks like this. You have the initial thing of Omni Graphle or Omni Outliner. You have one parameter, script, equals, and then this. What is this? Well, let's take a look at it. So here's our favorite little script for creating the blue circle with the red border, right? We remember this. Well, what we're going to do to that script is we're going to encode it. In other words, we're going to take certain characters and turn them into combination percent and then some two-character combination that represents those that can be used in URLs. So you'll see it encodes all kinds of special characters, including commas, forward slashes, question marks, colons, @signs, all those things, right? And if you need to decode, there's actually a JavaScript thing called decode URL. So as part of core JavaScript, there is an encoding command. And in addition, you can use the split and join functions to also encode other characters. I like to encode the parens, the bang, the tilde, and the period, and single quotes. I like to encode those. Although those are legal to use in URLs, I like to encode them as well. And then at the beginning of your automation URL, you have the name Omni Graphle or Omni Outliner, and then colon, / either localhost or 3 slashes, then omnijs.run. And 3 slashes means localhost. And this is the beginning to an Omni URL. So let me show you the routine for encoding a script. It's pretty simple. You basically pass in the name of the Omni app, the code of the script, then it takes that, makes it lowercase for the name, appends it to our little opening part of the script, encodes the body of the script, and then goes through with the split join and encodes all the other characters, puts the two pieces together and returns that to you. So what does that mean? You can even take that and put it into a web page in an HTML form. So an HTML form can actually do the encoding for you as well. So that means that when we take our little script and we run it through an encoding thing, then we get back this. Now this looks kind of weird, but if I colorize it, all of a sudden you can see that the script is there. The only thing that's different is all the punctuation and the spaces and the returns are gone. So now this becomes a URL. And like any URL, if I execute that URL, it's going to cause something to happen in the Omni application. Because the Omni application will take that URL, decode it, put it back into the JavaScript, and execute it. So let's take a look at an example here. I sat right there, and I had an Omni script as a QR code, and then I looked at it with my iPad, and when I ran it, it turned it into the blue circle on my iPad. So I had taken the URL and expressed it as a QR code that I looked at with the iPad camera. It doesn't make any difference how you express the URL or where it is or what application has it. And that's where it starts getting interesting. So let's take the first step outside the Omni applications and look at how it integrates with HTML. Now, since Omni Automation is based on core JavaScript and WebKit, that's the same core JavaScript that's used by HTML on your Apple device. They're related. They're exactly the same, which means that, oh, wait a minute. That means that you can use scripts as HTML links. Okay. So here's an HTML link, and your link direction, your location goes in there, right? And so if I expand that and I put an Omni Automation script in there, and I tap that, it will execute it. So let me show you a little example of this on OmniGraffle. So I'm going to draw out a square, and then I'm going to colorize this square. I'm going to just pick a color. Then I'm going to bring out a Safari web page. I'm going to go to a page that has a script link built in a button. I'm going to tap that button. It's going to ask me, do you want to run this script? And it will show me the script. I can review it to see what it is, make sure it's going to do what I want, and then it executes. So the first example of HTML use with Omni Automation is I can just have a simple script in a page that I tap, and it executes on my document. I don't have to create an action, put it into my application. I can just go to a specific web page and go tap. So if I'm at a company, I can have an internal web page that has all these things that I need to do, and I just go there, tap, 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 okay, close the page. Now, we can go one more step. So here's another web page, and in this time, I'm going to copy the link. I'm going to put it on the clipboard, copy. There's my Omni Automation URL. I'm going to select this shape, and then in OmniGraffle, I'm going to choose to attach the script to the shape by saying, I want to open a URL whenever I touch this shape. And that URL is my Omni script. Then I'm going to use the Browse tool, and I'll touch the shape. Then I'm going to use the Browse tool and touch one of those shapes. Then I'm going to use the Browse tool and touch one of those shapes. So I just got inherited functionality by copying a script URL from a web page. And now I've added it to my document, and no matter who I give that document to, they'll be able to take advantage of that tool and use that for creation. So I can have custom tools on a web page that I only need to use for a little while. I don't have to install them in my app. I can have custom tools that are available as just a web page link. Let's take a look at another example in HTML. Forms. Here's a basic, simple form. You'll notice that there's a pop-up button for choosing fill color, a pop-up button for stroke color, and then some shape images. Okay, simplest form. And we're going to do colorize a shape. Up. What did I just do? Let's go back. Do that. I jumped ahead of myself there. I thought that that was actually like on the, oh, it is. Hold on. Okay. So there's our script, right? This is our colorizing script that we're used to. Now, to make this script work with an HTML form, I'm going to take the part that has specific values for my fill color, stroke color, and shape, and I'm going to use placeholders instead. You see where I have X, 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 Y, 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 Z, Z, D, Z, D, right? And then I'm going to take that, I'm going to run it through my little encoding thing, woof, and I run it through the encoding thing, and I had an advance. It turns into an encoded script, but the placeholders are still there. Then, this is the HTML for my pop-up menu. For the values of that pop-up menu, I'm going to use my colors, or I'll use them expressed as RGB values that I can insert into my script. So very simple. I use either the name of the color or RGB values. And then here's the HTML table that contains the shapes that are going to trigger my script. And they call a function called add graphic, and they pass in the name of the shape: star, circle, diamond, rectangle. So the way this works is, here's my function in my web page. This is a JavaScript function in my web page. It's not an Omni function, it's just a JavaScript function. So when they tap a shape like the star, it calls this function and passes in the word star as the graphic type. Then the script goes and says, what's the current setting for the pop-up menu for fill color? What's the current setting for the pop-up for stroke? Then I'm going to replace the placeholders with those values using a JavaScript replace command. And the code for the script is already encoded in my function. And then I'm going to append that code append it to the URL targeting OmniGraffle. And then I'm going to tell the web page to load that URL. And that will execute that. So what does that look like? Well, here's how it all puts together. So I have my iPad, I tap this, I say, give me a blue, and then I'm going to tap it again, say with green, and then I want a circle, and then it shows it to me, I approve it, and there it is. And then I can move that away. Let's go back and change the values. So I'll go back over here, and I'll say, give me red, and then yellow. Okay, let's do a diamond. Fine, and there it is. Approved. So I can interact with HTML forms and have those do things in my application. Okay, next step, we're getting there. Semi-interesting? Okay. Data transfer. So let's take this concept just a little step farther. So here I have tables about the percentage of tax that's returned to states from the federal government. I'm a real policy wonk geek guy, and I love this kind of stuff. But here's tables, they have 50 states, and they talk about the percentage and everything. But I've turned these into making them interact with Omni applications since they're so good at expressing data. And I want you to notice a couple things. There's a link here to download a specific stencil of the map of the United States that Omni uses. In OmniGraffle, you can have these stencils which are pre-done graphics that you can drag into your application. If you don't have it installed, you can install it there. This click will actually put that on the page for me, and then this button over there will take the data from the table and colorize the map based upon the data. Whoa, okay, so here's what it looks like when it goes. So I'm on the Mac, I'm going to tap this, it says, do you want to run? It puts the stencil on my document for me. And you'll notice that the stencil comes pre-done with like North Dakota, capital Bismarck. Very good. So now I'm going to go over to my table, and I want to put the data from that table into that map. So I tap it. Now I'll go back over to North Dakota, and it says, hey, North Dakota, 34.8% returned on federal money in the year 2000. I'll scroll to year 2013. Try that. Run the table, run the script again, same script. And now it says, hey, North Dakota, 16.8. Well, that's interesting. So why did North Dakota change so much? It's because they discovered oil in North Dakota, and all of a sudden they needed less money coming back, and they could pay more money out. But what you just saw was the transfer of data from a table on a web page into an Omni document and dynamically colorize the objects based upon information. So how does that work? you have a row. We have the first cell, which is the name of the state, and then we have the next cell that has the percentage. And then we have like multiple columns for all 50 states. And then there's the button for performing the action. And let me show you the HTML that's behind this, because I want you to see how this gets integrated. So this is standard HTML. Here I have my row. There's the name of the row, AL. Then there's the cell that has the name of the state, and then the cell that has percentage value. Here is the button that gets pressed, and when it gets pressed, it executes a function called execute Omni Graphical Script, and it passes in the name of the table. So there's the name of the table that gets passed in when you tap the button. Up here is a div that contains the code for the script, and it's named the same as the table with code appended to it. It's not set to be displayed, and it has a placeholder that gets replaced with the data from this table. So to get the data out of the table, here's the HTML function, or the JavaScript function, standard JavaScript function for turning the contents of a table into a JSON object. There's where it pulls out the text content of every cell and gets the name of the row. So when it's done, it looks something like this, where you have all of these different records. Notice ID, state, Alabama, data. Particularly note the ID one. So this data then gets passed into the script, and it replaces the placeholder there, and then this iterates each object on the page and then finds a graphic that's named a particular ID of the row and changes its color value based upon the content of the percentage. And then here's the function on the web page that actually does all the work. So when I choose execute, it gets the table ID, gets the data from the table, encodes the data, then takes that and then finds the container on the web page that has the code for that script, and then gets the content of that, runs it, replaces the XXX with the table data, appends it to the Omni Graphical script URL, and then executes the script. And that runs it. So that means that this process can just be, I'm sitting on the tablet, and I'm using the tablet, and I can get the data from this table that I just swiped up. I can tap it. It does all the work at getting the set of graphics over onto the page for me instantly. Whoop. I drag it over to where I want to go. I swipe to bring the page back out again. I want to get the data out of the table, and then it's just a matter of tapping. And all of a sudden, iOS becomes a lot different in nature. All of a sudden, I'm able to do stuff with iOS that's incredibly functional without a lot of tapping. That's very powerful. If I could go to a series of pages on data and simply just tap and have that data exposed. And the reason that this is all possible is because in that stencil, all the states are named the postal codes, and that matches the ID of the roads in the table. And that's all that was necessary to make this magic happen. I know this is throwing a lot at you, but we're building here. So let's take this concept about HTML, and now we've seen we can transfer data. So we can have HTML as just a simple link. We can have HTML that's a form. We can have HTML that takes data from a table and transfers the data. Now, let's look at the next concept up from that, which is metadata. So here I have a web page, and on the web page are a catalog of objects. You know, ping pong, top of a wedding cake thing, TV set, cue ball, that kind of stuff. And I'm going to use this to build a document based upon the data on this page. And I want you to notice three things. First, you can download the document that has the shapes in it pre-done. And there's two buttons, place notes and import images. And then all of the objects with their SKU numbers. So let's take this and make this work in an iPad. So here's my document. I have my 3 picture shapes. I'm going to draw out a Safari web page that has the catalog with the buttons. And I'm going to select the first object up there. I'm going to tap it, and I'm going to tag it with some metadata. And the metadata is the SKU number of the product that I want to be in there. So then I can tap the next one. I'll swipe back and pick the pig. And then I'll tap that, and that tags that box with the SKU number. This is called tag container publishing. It's used quite a bit in the publishing industry to do things like real estate catalogs, auto trader magazines, those kind of things, all use tag container publishing principles. So you can see that the objects were named the SKU number, and now I'm going to tap the button for extracting the notes about them, or the description, or importing the images. I think I'm going to import the images. No, notes. And then I'm going to place the notes to the right of the box. So this got the metadata about each one of those objects and put it in a box next to the picture. Now I'm going to import all the pictures. Tap approve. Voila, it imports in place of the pictures, and then I can just close that off. So I was able to create a document using metadata tagging by tapping a picture on a web page of the product. Whoa, okay. All right, let's take a look at how that's done behind the scenes. On the web page are divs containing the descriptions that you saw, right? And they're set not to display. You'll notice it says display none, style. So that's just embedded on the page with all the other images. Then in the table are the images. These are the images, and you'll notice that they have touch controls. Key touched, key untouched, and on click. So it works on both the Mac and on a touch device. And the thing that ties these all together is the SKU number of the product. That exists both in the metadata and over here on the actual tap that launches the script in action. That information is then used to transfer over to the object. And let me show you what it looks like. You can see it better on the Mac because the Mac has more visibility. So here's split screen on the Mac. I have the catalog on the right. I select an object and look at the metadata that just came across. There's the notes, the name, the SKU number, and the URL for the image. All were transferred into that object in Omni Grapple by simply tapping or clicking on the object in the page. And if I hover over it, you can see all of the metadata right there. So then my task as a layout person is just simply to touch each one of the objects and then tag it with the information from the page. Okay, there's the second one right there. Very good. And then I'll do the third one. And we're going to tag that one over here. We'll use the globes from around the world. Select it. And again, it's all approved. We'll do that. And so now all the metadata has been stored locally in the document. We've gone through the process. Now the script for actually executing that is in the web page. So I don't have to install anything into my application. The script for importing those images was located right in the web page itself. So it's like a whole toolkit exists in the page that has the data. And now I'm going to go back and do the same type of notes placement. And hit that, and it will ask me where do you want to place the notes. Put them on the right-hand side. And again, so I was able to go from this web page to a formatted document by making choices in how I clicked. I didn't have to install any tools. All the information I needed was right there. So the flexibility behind Omni Automation is incredibly powerful when you start transferring information and controls. Even really complex information like this. Here I have hierarchical information. So each one of those records is related to the other records. And I want to create an org chart based upon that data. So I select an object over here, I approve it, and then it's going to transfer that chart data, a snapshot of that chart data, into the Canvas metadata for this site. And you can see there it is right there. So all the data from this organizational database is transferred and stored, and that object's charged to be the CEO. So then I can attach an Omni script that goes display subordinates, and then it's a matter of having fun. So now I can do what Omni Graphle does really well, which is display data. And I'm just going to select this, zoom it to fit the page, and then hit it with the browse tool, which will cause the script to run. And then it will look up who its subordinates are by just clicking on it and lay them out in an org chart instantly for me. And all I do is go through and click, and it lays the whole thing out. So there's an example of intelligence built in to a relational database source, all using the same principle. I'll zoom past this one, but it does the same thing on that. One last example of this whole HTML stuff, just to show you. So far, I've taken static web pages. I've used static HTML form. I used a static data table. But what about non-static sources that don't belong to you? So here's an example of how you can use Omni Automation with third-party applications. So here's a company, they're called Airtable. And what they do is they offer an online data source, and you can store your information up there and express it in terms of spreadsheets or a database, any way you want to express the data. And it's all cloud-based. So I'm going to take that information and extract the information and have that tie into my Omni application. So let me show you how that works. I'm going to draw a box out in my Omni application. I'm going to drag up a web page, open a web page that has an Airtable catalog. So this is my data on Airtable. You see it says airtable.com. This is my database. I'm going to select the little pig guy, and then I'm going to tap this link. Well, this is an Omni Automation link that's part of Airtable, and it's going to assign some metadata to that shape. And then I can use an Omni Automation script locally as a way to go back to the database at any time I want and get all the remaining information about it, import the image, and then I can place the notes and extract the metadata like I showed you before. So how did this happen? How does this work? And I could work dynamically with this. So I can go back to the database, change that, and then do it again, and it will be totally different. Let me show you. So to tag the selected graphic, this is the script that does this. This is what gets executed by Airtable. And it has placeholders in there that has information about the graphic. And then on Airtable, they have a method called record_ID that automatically gets the ID of the current record. I insert that in my Omni Automation script. I put it into my Airtable database, and it just becomes part of it. So that whenever I touch that link, it gets that record ID for that particular object, comes down, and assigns the metadata. Then once I've assigned the metadata, then it's just a matter of going back to the database anytime I want, using a URL, passing in my record ID and the name of my database, and then getting back the JSON, parsing the JSON, and then downloading the image. And that's what happens to be able to get this kind of information from a third-party data source. So it's not only static, it can be live data sources as well. This is incredibly powerful and incredibly flexible. Since they have this URL architecture, it allows a lot of communication, a lot of creative use for what you can do. And if you're looking to have some kind of scripting thing that provides maximum functionality, you're going to want it to be more than I can run a script in this application. You're going to want to have applications start talking to each other. So this is the first step there for that is I'm going to a different data source and I'm bringing down that information and applying it. So now I'm going to go back to Airtable, grab the remaining data, and let's look at the metadata here. you can see that all of this was brought down and assigned to that image, and then I can do the same type of notes placement. Again, all from a live data source in the cloud. Voila. Very powerful. And then this leads up to the one that we're looking for, app-to-app communication. So everything I just showed you is leading up to this point. So far we've seen that you can have simple like URLs, you can have a simple action that does something in your document, then you can express that as a URL that you can click on the web page, then that URL can be able to transfer data and then apply logic, and then we've seen that each step of this process you can do more and more with it. But the real trick is when you can talk from one application on iOS to the other application and get data from it and then come back. And here's how you do that with Omni Automation. So we've seen that you can run a script like in OmniGraffle. We've seen that. But what if I have some data in Omni Outliner that I want to use in OmniGraffle? What if I have some data that I want to actually build something with? How do I get that data over there? Well, they have this thing called call and response built in. So basically, you have your script, and this script will execute another script over on the target application. Get the information you want, bring it back to your script, and then continue executing. I call it call and response. It also incorporates xCallback URL for those that like the lower level architecture. Now, here's the code that's necessary to get an outline from Omni Outliner and convert it into JSON. That's the simple little bit of Omni Automation code that it takes to extract an outline and convert it to JSON. Just a little bit. So when that gets executed on Omni Outliner, I get back this JSON record of rows, right? So it's the row level 1 index content, and it gives me that information. So then, in order to run that, I can take that function and convert it into an Omni Automation script itself with the tell script command, where I pass in the name of the target application, the name of the function that I convert to a string, and then call the function itself. So there's the command. I pass in the name of the application, the name of the function, I convert it to a string. All of that gets converted and encoded for me. Then I add a new line character and then call that particular function. I get back, that one command will encode my script for me, and it contains everything that I needed. So then, once I call that, I use the script URL. I say call this, and it has a callback function built in with a reply. So Omni Outliner runs its script, gives me the information, it goes back into my reply, and then I can parse that and do whatever I want within my particular script over here. In this particular instance, in the example I'm going to show you, I'm going to take the information from an outline and convert it into slides in OmniGraffle. So here I am in Omni Outliner. You'll notice that I have like 3 different rows that have sub-rows, right? So there's my topics, acquire, process, and stuff. So I'm going to go over to OmniGraffle, and I'm going to run an action that's going to go over to Omni Outliner. Well, first thing I'm going to do is set up my canvas, sorry. This will resize my canvas to be a slide size, and then let's make it a title slide. So do you want to do this and convert it to a title center slide? Sure. So this is using Omni Automation just locally within the application to, get it to do some cool stuff. So I have my basic title slide for my slide presentation. I'm going to call it Workflow Designs. Now I need to get the other slides, and I'm going to get that from Omni Outliner. I go up to my automation menu, and I choose an action to get the outline slides. Do I want just the top level, or do I want the top levels and children? I'm going to get all of them together. Here's the script that's going to run, that's going to grab the JSON. It's going to come back and execute, and now I can just swipe, and you'll see each one of the slides. And then I can go back and even tap that word process, it will take me back to that in Omni Outliner. So I can link back, I can go change the data in Omni Outliner because I have a relationship between the two applications through the scripting. I'm going to edit this data. I'm going to edit the actual topic itself and say process and format. And then I'm going to select that, leave that selected, tap with fat fingers, go back to Omni Outliner, Omni Graphical. I'm going to say update this slide for me. So we'll ask, do you want to update this slide? I'll say, yep, please update it for me. So then I update, and then I can just, it goes back to Omni Outliner, runs the script, come back, I can tap it, and there's the data. So I'm able to communicate between applications, swap data, target and map data so that I can touch something in one application and find the source in the other application, and then bring that information back. That's incredibly powerful, and that's the level of functionality that we're looking for if you're trying to create a cross-platform scripting solution that people can really use. So it looks like I hit you with a Nerf bat. Let me show you something that's a little bit easier, okay? You know about the workflow app? How many of you use the workflow app? It's actually very cool. It's like Automator on iOS. It has certain level of functionality. Let me quickly show you what you can do with workflow and Omni Automation. So here's a workflow. The first step is to show all my phone contacts or all my address contacts. Take the information out of the one that I choose and store that in these variables. Encode that information and put it into a variable. Then, once you've put it into a variable, here's my Omni Automation URL. Replace the placeholder in the Omni Automation URL with the encoded information about the person, and then open that URL. And I'm going to save this workflow on my desktop, on my iPad desktop, as a button for business letter. So I tap it, it brings up my address book, I tap whoever I want to send a business letter to, it shows me the script, I tap that, and in Omni Graphical it instantly lays out a perfect business letter with all their contact information, with my information and everything, ready for me to edit. And then I can just edit it, type in my business letter, and it's done exactly the form according to Princeton. So there's a very simple example of how you can interact with the workflow app. So to summarize, Omni Automation is based on core JavaScript that's part of WebKit on every Apple device, both macOS and iOS. And what Omni has done is expose their applications to this technology. So you can run scripts from the console. You can create plugins that allow you to have custom scripts that you can share with other people. You can even embed them as HTML links or HTML forms. And then also, you can have that integrated with online data sources like Airtable. And you can even use it in an app-to-app communication where you're grabbing information between apps and sharing it and using it back and forth. It's incredibly powerful. And you can also use it with the workflow app to create some interesting, useful little workflows. And it's really interesting. And I encourage you to join me out there on the ocean with this. We're at the point where this is starting to be a wave. Omni has just released their second application, Omni Outliner. These are approved by Apple and in the Apple Store. And I think what I envision happening is that this is going to gain momentum among other developers as well. And I hope eventually Apple will see the wisdom in this too, and maybe then we can start having a really comprehensive scripting solution that you can rely on. But right now, we're still on the surfboard out in the ocean. But I encourage you to come paddle out with me and check this out. Thank you very much. Thank you.